By now, if you're following social media at all, or even the mainstream media, you know that Facebook recently got caught in a bit of a public relations bind when it became public knowledge that they engaged in an experiment on some of their users back in 2012. So there's been a lot of responses about this, some of them very knee-jerk, some of them very thoughtful, and I want to reflect a little bit on what it means for us in what we call the technosphere. What I want to do in this video, because I'm going to do a follow-up to this video most likely next week, what I want to do in this one is primarily two things. I want to go over the details of what actually happened, so it's sort of an informative video, and then I want to talk about some of the most common positive and negative responses on the part of people who've been talking about this or expressing opinions about this. And then I'm going to finish up just by hitting on a few points that I'll talk about in the next video. I'm not going to explore here, but I do want to bring to light. So let's actually start out with, the raw information that we have. What actually took place? So Facebook carried out a study, and it was led by this guy Adam Kramer, who was the lead researcher on the study. It ran for 1 week in January 2012, and it had to do with 689,003 Facebook users who were the affected ones. Now, just to put things in proportion, Facebook at this time has roughly around 1 billion users, they estimate, so this would be less than 1% of Facebook users. In any case, what they did is they changed the algorithms that they were using. If you don't know this, this is a little bit of background information. Facebook a long time ago quit just displaying whatever happened to come up, and they started using algorithms to determine what posts you're probably going to be most interested in and what they were most interested in showing you. And they change these algorithms up every so often. In any case, what are they designed to do? They're designed to bring some content to the top and put some content below, or if you're clicking on the top posts, you only get a very small filtered amount of the raw material that's coming your way. So what did they do? They removed all or some of the positive posts in some people's feed for that week, coming from their Facebook friends. And in other people's, they did exactly the opposite. They removed all or some of the negative posts. And what they wanted to do was see whether this would affect how other people were posting, the people who were being subjected to the experiment. They wanted to see specifically whether getting a higher proportion of negative posts would lead them to post more negative comments, negative posts, and conversely whether more positive posts would lead to people doing more positive posting. And what they found is there was a significant correlation that when they changed the algorithm, it produced an average of 1 positive or negative post per or negative or positive word out of 1,000 words for the people that were in this experiment. So, translated into less numeric language, what this means is that if you were getting subjected to this filtering and it was skewing towards the negative, your posts, your comments on your friends' feeds, on your own wall, would be slightly more negative. You would use a little bit more negative language. And likewise, if you were getting a higher dose of positive stuff, then you would use slightly more positive words in your own feeds. But again, increase on average of 1 in 1,000. So if you think about just how much you actually post on Facebook, if you're writing 5 sentences a day, you might only be doing 100 words in those sentences. If you're one of these Facebook people who writes page after page after page of stuff, of course you can go through 1,000 words fairly quickly. So, the study was then developed into an article which was called Experimental Evidence of Massive Scale Emotional Contagion Through Social Networks. And I have got a link to it here for you in the description. That's a rather ambitious wording for this. Experimental evidence of massive scale emotional contagion through social networks. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the next video, about why this is, kind of over the top language there. Anyway, it was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA in 2012, and there were two other researchers in on it, Jamie Guillory, I think that's how his name is pronounced, and Jeffrey Hancock, both of whom are from Cornell. Now, the study was used by some other researchers and was being cited in literature, but it was more or less under the radar unless you were into that sort of thing. I have to admit, I didn't know about it myself until the story broke. And then New Scientist brings it to light and says, hey, look at what's going on. And then it just blew up. It turned into a major story, and people start weighing in on all different sides. Adam Kramer actually defended his research on Facebook, interestingly enough, and said, things along the lines of, well, we didn't really mean to upset anybody, but you can read his own stuff. I'll link to that here as well. Facebook's COO, Sheryl Sandberg, apologized for in her view, mishandling of it. Susan Fisk, the editor of the article in the journal, said that the study was actually IRB approved, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment. As it turns out, it doesn't look like it actually was. The journal itself defended the publication of the study, and the latest bit of interesting stuff is that some European countries are looking at this and seeing whether there's any privacy concerns that have been violated, because they tend to have somewhat stricter laws, some of those countries. And the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC, has just asked the FTC to do an investigation, and they filed a complaint. So that's what has taken place. There's one other thing that I should specify as well, which is that this is part of a big data approach to research with respect to language, which wants to identify emotions that people are having on the basis of their speech, and it does so by looking for particular keywords. And this is a very coarse way of looking at emotion, they're positive or negative. And there's really no parsing of this to determine whether somebody's using a positive term in an ironic way so that it's actually negative, or vice versa. It's actually rather crude. But I'm going to talk about my misgivings about this research and this kind of approach in the next video. So now let's talk about some of the responses, because I find this really interesting, and it raises a lot of important questions, not only about ethics, but even about language and ontology and epistemology. There's a lot of stuff rolled up in here, and about public discourse and how that should work. So here's the first thing to actually say about what happened. Facebook was carrying out a study, and they're not the only people doing this, but they got caught with their hand in the jar in this one. They were carrying out a study that had to do with producing emotional responses, or what we call affect, and seeing whether that could lead to changed behavior. In this case, the changed behavior was actually linguistic behavior. It was posting. So they're seeing whether one kind of action, positive or negative language uses, can lead to an increase in positive or negative language uses, with the person in the middle, the one who's being experimented upon, their emotions being involved. And as it turns out, this study doesn't really demonstrate that much, because it wasn't a huge increase. It went on for a week. It didn't have a great effect on the people who were posting positive or negative. But they did manage to produce an emotional response, because a lot of people are very ticked off. And now notice, too, it's not just that they have a negative response, it's an anger response. So, ironically, Facebook managed to produce a much more consistent response than they had intended to by the experiment. And I would actually be surprised if there isn't somebody just sort of out there doing data analysis on these responses to see, what could be made of those. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Now, I'm going to talk about the people who are criticizing Facebook's actions, and then I'll talk about some of the defenses that are made, and then I'll wrap up by hitting on some of the things that I'm particularly interested in. So I mentioned this term IRB. IRB stands for Institutional Research Board. And I've been on an IRB, and I've had to submit for IRBs. And what an IRB is it's a bunch of people. You often see these in universities. It's a bunch of people who look over proposals that are made that have to do with human subjects, and they determine whether they can say, yes, you can proceed with this experiment, or no, and it's supposed to be on ethical grounds. Now, I myself have a lot of misgivings about the way IRBs work. I don't think that they actually embody any sense of ethics in a robust sense, very well. When they do work well, I think that's the exception rather than the norm, but that's a separate issue. In any case, what an IRB is supposed to be doing in theory is it's supposed to be having a lot of people review the proposal and then say, give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or you need to revise it, and here's the problems with it. And there are certain key features of experiment design, of study design, that are going to be focused on by any IRB. So one of the important things that comes up is what's called informed consent, and we'll get to that in a moment. But there's other things as well that have to do with the human subjects. Now, an IRB is not actually needed for a private company to carry out experiments. It's needed if you're a university researcher, and that's because that's a fairly recent thing. That's in large part it's been a response to unethical experiments being carried out in the past. And if you want to take the course that is offered by the National Institutes of Health, that sort of walks you through what you have to do, and some places you actually have to have done that course in order to do an IRB application. I know that was the case when I was at Fayetteville State. They'll tell you about the Tuskegee experiment and this experiment and all this unethical experimentation. And IRBs came about in order to try to be kind of a guardrail, a safeguard against unethical experimentation taking place. Unethical in the sense that it would violate people's rights or otherwise harm the human subjects that it's being conducted on. Now, what is required by the IRB? In most areas we would call this disclosure. In the IRB setting, it's called informed consent. And so the idea is that people who are involved in experimentation need to actually know that they're part of an experiment. Now, they don't necessarily need to know that they're being experimented on in this way or this way or this way or this way. As a matter of fact, some experiments are set up so that somebody thinks they're being tested for this, but they're actually being tested for something else. But they do need to know that they're part of an experiment. They do need to know, certain parameters of it. Facebook didn't reveal that to anybody who was involved. So a lot of people are angry because Facebook essentially experimented on its users without letting them know that that was going to be the case. And one of the things that is an option for somebody, if they know they're being experimented on, is to say, I don't want to be part of the experiment. So without any sort of disclosure, it's not possible to opt out of the experiment. And so some people are criticizing Facebook for that reason. Another thing that people are quite angry about is that Facebook was essentially trying to manipulate its users and their use of the product, the platform, to produce in them an emotional response, which then would lead to some sort of action or behavior, in this case, a change in their language. That's what the study was intended to look at, and that's what they experimented on. So there's two parts there that people don't like. They don't like people messing around with their emotions, and they also don't like people making them do things. And you can raise a lot of questions at this point. Did Facebook actually make anybody do anything in any strict sense of those terms? It seems pretty hard to make a case for that. Even, if you look at extreme cases, because the average was 1 in 1,000 words. So maybe there was somebody who wrote 100 negative terms on average out of 1,000. So 1 out of every 10 of their words became pejorative. That'd be an outlier, but maybe that actually did happen. People don't like the sense that they're being manipulated, and it's really interesting here because if you're a Facebook user, odds are you were not one of the people who was manipulated, but it seems like a lot of people have taken on the idea that they were indeed manipulated by Facebook during this experiment. So there's that. That's another criticism that's being made. A third criticism that you can make is that this experiment involved a kind of censorship of information. This actually strikes me as a really good criticism. Facebook already has algorithms in place that, as one of the bloggers who's commenting on this said, they keep you from seeing the posts of people who are not easy to get a handle on in Facebook's algorithms, or who don't contribute much to Facebook. Your posts go further down, and you could see that as a kind of censorship. I think censorship is a little bit strong there, because censorship implies things being taken out. So even in normal Facebook, some people's posts are rising up higher. Some people's posts are going deeper into the depths where they're probably not going to be seen. Just like with Google listings, that's happening all the time. There's an awful lot of money spent on trying to boost things. Now, Facebook was not just doing their normal algorithms in this case. They were actually changing the algorithms so that positive posts were being taken out for those who are being tested for negative response, and negative posts were being taken out for those who are testing for positive response. And it's interesting. The complaints that are being made have to do mainly with, is Facebook depressing people? Because it doesn't seem like anybody's saying, yeah, Facebook was making people happier than they ought to have been. But really what was happening in that case is, if I was writing negative posts and you're my Facebook friend, my negative posts were being filtered out so that they could see whether that would make you happier. Which means they're actually censoring me, which means that they're actually censoring the information coming to you. So I think that that's a valid complaint that's being made. There's some investigations going on right now about whether this violated privacy, expectations, rights. Mostly that's happening in Europe. I don't really know enough about that to say very much at this point. I don't see myself this having to do so much with privacy as with things like informed consent, manipulation, and censorship. Another big complaint that's been made, and this one's kind of an interesting one, is that this research is tied to military research into producing emotional reactions, affect, military-oriented or funded research through this agency, Minerva, which is interested in questions like, could we replicate the Arab Spring? You remember Twitter played a huge role in that. Does emotional contagion work through social networks? If it does, can we use it to, suppress the movements that we don't want and boost the movements that we do want. And, the military has been interested in this sort of thing for a long time. We're not the only ones that are interested in this. The Chinese military is very interested in this sort of thing. There's all sorts of other players involved. But in this case, the concern is that the Facebook researcher is colluding with, people who are connected with the military. Notice it's not the Facebook researcher himself directly, but one of the other article writers who's being targeted, namely Hancock. So those are the big negative responses to this, and let's look now at some of the responses that aren't so much positive responses, but more like damage control. Hey, this isn't that big of a deal, sort of arguments. And the first one that I think is particularly bad is Facebook. Has had a few people saying, "Oh, we didn't mean to upset anybody." That strikes me as complete BS, because obviously they meant to upset people in the experiment themselves, because that was the whole purpose of the experiment, or at least half of the experiment, to see whether by introducing a higher proportion of negative or negatively worded posts, they could get you to make more negative responses. They could make the flip side and say, well, we also, for every person who had negative responses and who, came away from Facebook a little bit grouchier or depressed or whatever, there were also a whole bunch of people who, for everyone that happened to, there's at least another one who got an unduly positive spin on things and, came out of the experiment with greater buoyancy, or pick whatever you want. But I think all of this is really just, spin. And nobody should believe any of that. The lead researcher knew exactly what he was doing. This is not somebody just, accidentally bumping into on the street. This is a massive experiment that was carried out. They knew exactly what they were getting into. So that strikes me as just, self-serving BS. Other people are making the argument, and this is an argument that gets made a lot in technology circles. This serves the greater good. And the buzzword with that is innovation. Innovation requires that we let researchers, try out different things, experiment, and, if you tell people that you're experimenting on them, you're not going to get good data, and, so we value science and experimentation and all that, so that's a good thing. Maybe so. But then, the argument has to go beyond just science, science, science. We're not even really sure if this is science anyway. I mean, doing statistical analyses doesn't by itself turn it into science or good science. But in any case, the idea is that this innovation is going to make our lives better. That's the utilitarian argument for this, that if we let Facebook experiment on a small bunch of people whose rights are being violated in some, small ways, but not really big ways. It's not like anyone, is really getting that harmed by this. Then it's going to make for a much better user experience for all the rest of us. And Facebook is this, by doing this, really serving the greater good of everybody. I don't really find that argument all that plausible, in part, not so much because I actually disagree with how it's set up, or because I have a big beef with utilitarianism as such. It's more that, in my view, there's too easy of an appeal to innovation. Innovation is a buzzword. Unless you can actually show me what innovation came from it, and this is actually being a good utilitarian, unless you can actually show me what innovation came from it or is likely to come from it, your argument doesn't stand. And don't point me at past things and NASA and plastics and Velcro and Tang, because that's not Facebook. That's a whole different thing. NASA gets to make their arguments about their stuff. Facebook's got to make their own arguments about their product and what innovations are coming from it and how it's improving all of our lives. And, they probably could. I'd actually be happy to give them pointers on it, but I doubt that's going to happen. Another argument that's getting made is, look, this is a pretty small study. It really didn't affect that many people. And, the ones that were actually negatively affected by it, who might have gotten, a little bit depressed or angry, or pick whatever negative emotions you want, anxious, jealous, all these negative affects. It's only a very small percentage of the users, so really this isn't that big of a deal. And in one respect, they're right, because if there's 1 billion users and you're experimenting on, say, 700,000 of them, that's a very small proportion. On the other hand, in absolute numbers, 700,000 strikes me as a lot of people. So, I don't really buy that one myself. There's another argument that's being made, which I think is, in some respects, a good argument, in the sense that it's an argument that you can make, and technically it's right. On the other hand, I think that the people who make those kinds of arguments display their bad character and the fact that we shouldn't trust them at all by making that very argument. Here's the argument. Well, look, Facebook is a private corporation. They don't actually need IRB approval to do anything like this. They certainly didn't need Cornell's IRB approval. And the Cornell researchers, they didn't technically need IRB approval for this, because they weren't the ones actually gathering the data. They were just taking the information and then, helping to parse it. That's, okay, so technically all of that is true. There's ways of taking true statements and making something that's globally false. And what's globally false about this is there really does need to be some sort of oversight that's ethics-based, that involves competent, people looking over this stuff and saying, yeah, okay, that's fine, or no, this you need to actually disclose to these people that they're being experimented on. So I don't buy that one either. I certainly don't buy the little dodge of, we were only parsing the data. I remember, I'm a philosopher, so you wouldn't think I'd have to do very much with IRB with human subjects. I applied for IRBs just because I was using assessment data that had been generated through having students take, the CLA, the Collegiate Learning Assessment, in a faculty-developed one and faculty-graded one, and I wanted to use that to write an article. I had to do an IRB for that, even though all I was doing was taking somebody else's data and then parsing it. You know why? Because FSU wanted to make sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's. They wanted to make sure that we jumped through these, admittedly kind of pain-in-the-ass hoops, so that we could say, yes, we actually do have IRB approval. Some people actually looked this over, and it's all on the up and up. Cornell, you'd think, would be a little bit better about that. Another argument that's being made, and this is closely related, is, well, Facebook technically already has approval. Anybody who's entering into it has this, this thing that they have to click, I agree, and in it says that, look, your data might be used for this or that. There's some problems because the exact formulation wasn't there in 2012, and it's also kind of a dodge. They basically have to say, look, tacitly you agreed to be part of this experiment. And I don't know. I have a hard time thinking that really answers people's objections. Here's the one that I think actually is on track. Of all that's not that big of a deal. Look, when you sign up for a social network and you participate in it, you're part of an experiment from the beginning. You're involved in an experiment where people are giving you positive and negative stuff all the time. And you can, individuals engage in this sort of trying to sway people's emotions and opinions and produce results. Corporations do it all the time. That's what we call advertising. Why is what Facebook did so beyond the pale? That's the big objection there, and I actually think that that's on track. You know, there's two slogans that you might want to use in this case. One is Marshall McLuhan's "The medium is the message." Look, when you're doing Facebook, you're doing something that is different than other forms of communication. You are participating in a social network. Do you have the same expectations that you would with other things? I'm not even sure. I mean, it's not like you can say, you know, the newspaper is responsible for getting me down because they're on their editorial pages, they're always negative. You know, or think about TV. If you live in a major metropolitan area and you watch the nightly news, you're going to see a lot of killings and fires and accidents, and that might depress you. The medium does matter. And then, you know, they also say content is king. And this was really about content. Was what they were doing so, like I said, beyond the pale that we should all now get you know, upset and say, I'm going to get off of Facebook, or Facebook needs to get its act together. I don't know. If we want to say that sort of thing, then we should be as leery of regular Facebook as we are of manipulated Facebook, because in a certain sense it's all manipulated. So those are the back and forth, you know, I don't want to say pros and cons, it's more like the cons and the, well, that's not that bad of a con side. And what I want to bring up as I bring this to a close is just a few things. These strike me as the really significant, bigger issues that require more explanation and exploration than I can do in this short video. And I'm going to do that in my next Philosogeek Reflections. So I brought one of these up already. Why are we so bothered by this case and not so bothered by other aspects of Facebook? Why is it that a researcher carrying out a pretty limited experiment that didn't have huge effects, it did not produce emotional contagion, you know, in any sort of meaningful sense. Sure, they're statistically meaningful, but not meaningful in like the, wow, this could actually be used to like bring the empire down. Why are we so bothered by this? That's something I think we really ought to explore more and think about that. If we're so bothered by this, why aren't we up in arms about the advertising that takes place every day? Why do we, you know, allow universities to spin all sorts of stuff, including the statistics they have about, say, crimes on campus? You know, these are worth thinking about. The other thing that I think is really, really important to reflect on is there are some proposals that Facebook and maybe, you know, Google and other, you know, similar companies ought to have, if not something like an institutional review board, they ought to have an ethics board. And so there's a lot of questions that come up with that. You know, I'll just hit on a few of them that occurred to me as soon as I started reading about this. Who's going to be on that board? How are you going to keep that board from actually getting corrupted or bogged down? How is this not going to contribute to a culture of rubber stamping? You know, is this going to be transparent and open to people on the outside? You know, there's a lot of concerns there. I think that's something that's well worth exploring, though. So I'm going to talk about that in another one. Another issue that's come up before, and I think this actually points us towards, is how should we understand social media companies, particularly the really big ones, the ones that not only do something with their platform like Twitter does, or LinkedIn does, but have what we would call global or totalizing ambitions, like Facebook does. You remember, you know, just a few years back, Facebook tried to bring out a LinkedIn killer. Why? Because Facebook is something very different than LinkedIn. Facebook is a company like Apple, like Microsoft, like Google, like Yahoo wanted to be and still is trying to be, where they don't just do one thing, they want to bring everything under their umbrella. So if that's the case, maybe we should consider things like Google or Facebook to be public utilities. And if that's the case, then what do we do with utilities? We have public regulation for them, governmental regulation and oversight. So that's something that's, worth thinking about as well. I'm actually not for viewing them as utilities. I think we need to see them as something kind of hybrid. And then the other thing that I want to reflect on is, what are the ideas governing this kind of experimentation? Not ideas about is it ethical or not, but more core assumptions having to do with the study design itself. How do you actually know what counts when you're looking at language as a positive or negative term without making all sorts of reductive assumptions? And if you're doing that, if you're treating language as something less like language that is used by human subjects in communication with each other and more like a computer code, are you actually, you might say, falsifying your research as you're doing your research? Are you messing things up in a certain way and then concealing the fact that you're doing that? I have some severe misgivings about the claims that get made in this kind of research. I think it's fascinating stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm very interested in the emotions myself, how they're provoked, how they're manipulated, how they're moved in certain directions, what sort of insights we can have about that. But I think that this research is actually quite crude when it comes to understanding and conceptualizing emotion. So that's an issue that I'm going to explore as well. So hopefully you come away from this with a few thoughts of your own. If you have some, go ahead and share them in the comments. And there's really not much more to say about this until I do my next video.